Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural session, of the 2024 Faculty Job Search Prep Camp. I'm excited you could join us. Today, we're going to be talking about 5 ways to prepare for the academic job market. My name is Allison Howard. I'm an Associate Director at Career Services on the team that serves graduate students and postdocs. If you recognize my name, it's probably because I've sent you an annoying number of emails about the prep camp, so I apologize for that. My colleague Diane Hall is also here. She'll be monitoring the chat in case you have questions. You want to say hi, Diane?
Had to unmute myself. Good morning, everyone. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat and I'll pass them on to Allison.
Wonderful. So presumably you're all here today because you're considering applying for faculty positions. Maybe you're going on the market right now, maybe next year, maybe you've already been on the market once and you're going again this year. Regardless of your timeline, you probably already know that applying for faculty jobs can be a very long process, right? One that may have already started for some of you. So I actually met with a student earlier this summer who had a deadline July 15th for a faculty position beginning fall 2025. So over a year in advance. Applications will continue to be due throughout the fall semester, possibly into the spring. So the job cycle can last up to a full year in some cases. It's also a more complex and frankly idiosyncratic process than applying for other kinds of jobs, just in terms of the sheer number of different documents that you're going to be asked to submit. So for industry jobs, they ask for a resume, maybe a cover letter, that's it. For faculty jobs, you're going to be asked to submit a CV, cover letter, teaching statement, research statement, diversity statement, maybe a teaching portfolio, maybe a writing sample, letters of recommendation, transcripts. So there are a lot of moving pieces to keep track of. So for this session, 5 ways to prepare for the academic job market, it was honestly a little tricky to plan insofar as there are a lot more than 5 ways that you could prepare. And part of the reason I decided to limit it to 5 was to try and make this long, complex process seem a little more manageable and give you a kind of concrete, finite starting point that you can then build from throughout the rest of August and into the fall semester. So what we're going to talk about today is 5 knowledge domains that you can focus on as you get ready to apply for faculty jobs. So the guiding question for this session is, what do you need to know before going on the academic job market? First off, you need to know yourself. Okay, what do I mean by that? I mean, you need to do some self-reflection and self-assessment work to identify your particular skills, interests, values, and professional goals. Now, students are sometimes skeptical about this step in the process. They tell me, my skills are, I'm a good researcher, I'm a good teacher. My goal is to become a professor. What more do you need to know? So why is this step important? I would argue that it's important for 2 reasons. The first is that it's going to help you determine which roles and institutions are a good fit for you, right? So you may have certain research and teaching goals, but you need to think about what kind of environment is best going to support those goals. What kind of department is going to be sort of stimulating for you? Who do you want to be working with as colleagues? What kinds of students do you want to be teaching? That's all really important in thinking about, where you're going to be able to find fulfilling environments that are going to allow you to fulfill your professional and personal goals. It's also important because it's going to help you demonstrate your fit for particular jobs persuasively to search committees, right? So when search committees are evaluating candidates, they're not just looking at sort of technical qualifications. They're not just saying, I'm going to hire the person that has the most publications. I'm going to hire the person that has the most teaching experience. They're looking for someone who is going to be excited to teach and do research at their particular institution, right? Who's going to be excited to work with their students, collaborate with their faculty, who sort of understands what the priorities are of that department and is going to work hard to help advance those priorities. So the question of fit, especially in a competitive market, is sometimes what ends up being the deciding factor among several well-qualified applicants, right? Who seems like they really understand the school well and can demonstrate how their interests and values are well aligned with the interests and values of that department. So as you're sort of assessing your skills, interests, and values, there's a number of different questions that you can be asking. So as you're thinking about what kind of institution you might want to end up at, you can be thinking about, do you want it to be more research focused or teaching focused? Do you want to work more with undergraduate students or graduate students? You can think about whether you have geographic preferences, right? I know that often the received wisdom is that you should just apply for whatever jobs are available in your field, wherever they might be, right? You can't afford to be picky in a competitive market. But I'm here to tell you that it is absolutely okay to have geographic preferences, to say that there are some places that you're just not willing to move for a job, right? That's okay. Some of you might be running dual searches with a partner that might impact where you're applying to. You might be looking to move closer to family. So all of that may affect your decision about sort of which kinds of opportunities you're most interested in, which ones you want to prioritize. And this is going to help you, again, not just find positions that are going to be a good fit for you, but also when you inevitably get that question during an interview, why do you want to work here? You will have a much easier time answering that question because you will have already thought about all the things that are appealing about the particular departments that you're applying for. Now, when it comes to the question of skills, what I often find is that when applicants are in the early stages of drafting their job materials, they're often articulating their skills in this sort of generalized way, right? I have teaching skills, I have research skills, I have service experience, and that's great. Those are the kinds of categories that search committees are going to be evaluating you on. But what you have to keep in mind is those are the basic categories of skills that really all PhDs and postdocs have to some degree, right? That's really what the PhD is meant to prepare you to do research and teach and things like that. So what you want to be thinking about with skills is what sets you apart from other candidates, right? What is your specific set of skills, a specific intersection of your research and teaching and service skills that are going to make you a more interesting or appealing candidate to these various search committees, and trying to be as specific and concrete as possible as you're sort of articulating those skills. So thinking about how you want to sort of position yourself in the market and how you can articulate your identity in a way that's going to feel personal to you and memorable to search committees, as opposed to just making these broad statements that really any PhD or postdoc could make. And it's all sort of driving towards this last question of what value can you add to their department, right? So connecting your skills to the particular schools that you're applying for. Now, I often get asked, oh, okay, I understand I need to be more specific with my claims, but what exactly does that mean? I'm having a hard time imagining sort of what you mean by general versus specific claims about my identity as a researcher or educator. So I want to show you just a few examples so you can get a sense of kind of what I'm talking about here. So this first sentence I'm going to show you is the kind of sentence I often see in early drafts of cover letters for faculty positions. If you have written a sentence like this yourself, I don't want you to feel bad. I'm not trying to call anyone out or make anyone feel guilty. This is not a terrible sentence. But this candidate wrote, I believe that my research, teaching, and service accomplishments make me a strong candidate for this position. So, in theory, they are addressing the categories that search committees care about: research, teaching, and service. But you can see how this doesn't really tell me anything specific about this candidate. This is the kind of sentence that really any PhD student or postdoc could write, right? Everybody has these basic categories of experience to different degrees and in different combinations. So it's not really going to be helpful if I'm on a search committee. It doesn't help me distinguish this applicant from any other applicant or understand the specific value that they would bring to my department. So not the most exciting or memorable sentence. Now compare that to, I am eager to contribute a quantitative biology research program that is strongly complementary to your department, enabling collaborative forward engineering approaches to reconstructing developmental processes. All right, so you can immediately see how this is a more specific and dynamic sentence than the first one, right? So they're being precise about their identity as a researcher, they're a quantitative biologist, but importantly, they're not just saying, I'm a quantitative biologist, here's what my research is about. They're already framing it in terms of what they can contribute to this particular department. So they're thinking of, why would this department care that I'm a quantitative biologist? Well, in this case, it's going to be complementary to what they're already doing. So that could mean a variety of things. It could mean that this is a department that doesn't yet have a quantitative biology research program, and so they're filling a gap in this department's offerings. It could mean the department already has some quantitative biology research programs, but this person is going to be able to reinforce and grow that offering. So, however you want to frame it, you want to think of it in terms of contributions, right? So your identity as a researcher doesn't just exist in a vacuum. You want to be helping the schools understand how this specific identity is going to benefit them. With this next example, I really like it because for every claim that the candidate is making about themselves and their identity as a researcher, they're explaining at every step why that might be interesting or important to the people reading this application. So they start off by saying that they're an interdisciplinary scientist. Why does that matter? That matters because it's going to enhance this school's mission of creative thought. Then they say their research is primarily computational. Why does that matter? Because it allows for flexibility of resources. Their research also has an experimental component. Why does that matter? Because it offers students experience in a range of methods. So at every step of the way, they're really connecting the dots for the search committee and saying why these particular skills and experiences would be valuable in this context. So, I can't guarantee you that these sentences are going to land you a job offer, but I think you can see how these are maybe more memorable and more dynamic and more persuasive than the first one in terms of being very specific about your skill set and always connecting those skills to the needs and the identity of the department that you're applying to. Okay, so once you know yourself, the next step is to know your genres, right? So I already mentioned up top that you're going to be asked to submit all kinds of different documents for your faculty job applications, CV, cover letter, teaching statement, research statement, diversity statement, possibly some others as well. So before you dive in and start writing, it's really important that you understand exactly what you're going to be asked to submit, what the standards and conventions of each of those documents is, and what the goal of each document is. Right, so some of these genres are probably familiar to you already. I'm sure you already have a CV in some form, even if you need to update it for the faculty job market. Others you may have never encountered before, right? You've probably never written a teaching statement before, unless maybe you did the teaching certificate program at Setley. But otherwise, this is probably a brand new genre. It's kind of a niche genre. So you want to make sure you really understand what these documents are asking for so that you can make sure you're kind of meeting the expectations of the search committees. And I find that there often are kind of minor misunderstandings about the goals of some of these documents. So if we take the teaching statement as an example again, some people think that the purpose of a teaching statement is to communicate how passionate you are about teaching, or how much you care about your students. And that may be part of it, but really search committees aren't as interested in your feelings about teaching. What they want to know is, what are your goals as an educator, and what have you done to try to advance those goals, right? So when you go into the classroom, what are the kinds of learning outcomes that you're setting? How are you helping students meet those learning outcomes? How are you assessing whether students are learning what they're meant to be learning? Those things are much more interesting and persuasive to search committees than just a string of statements about your feelings about teaching. So understanding that goal ahead of time is going to help you write documents that are ultimately more persuasive on the job market. The other reason it's important to really get to know these genres is that the better you understand them, the better you'll be able to infuse them with your own voice and narrative rather than writing something more formulaic, right? So it's very common when you don't know a genre very well and don't have a lot of confidence in your ability to produce that genre to kind of fall back on sort of templates or samples that you've seen or kind of more generalized claims because you're not really sure what you're doing yet. And those are the kinds of documents that are going to have less of an impact because they're going to be, harder to distinguish from the hundreds of other applications that they're receiving. So the better you get to know these genres, the more you'll start to understand how you might be able to play around with these genres to make them a little more interesting and unique, to get creative with it. So, each of these documents does have its own set of standards and conventions, but they don't have rules exactly, right? There are multiple approaches and strategies that you can use as you're writing these various documents. And the better you understand that, the more you can start to, like I said, get a little more playful, write something that's more unique to you, that's going to be more memorable to search committees. So assuming I convinced you that it is important to learn about these genres, you may be wondering, how can I do that? Where do I go for that information? So I want to highlight 4 resources today. There's obviously more than 4 that you can be using, but I think this is going to give you a really good foundation. The first is the Faculty Job Search Prep Camp, which you're already here, so you're ahead of the game there. On Monday, August 12th, that's the day that we have dedicated exclusively to written job materials. So we're going to have separate sessions on CVs, cover letters, research statements, teaching statements, and diversity statements. I highly encourage you to register for those sessions. But really, those sessions, which are half an hour each, are not long enough to tell you everything there is to know about these genres, right? These are complex and nuanced genres. So you want to be looking for ways to continue to expand your understanding throughout the rest of August into the fall semester. That's where career services can be helpful. So we have a website dedicated to application materials for the faculty job search. You can say we have different sections dedicated to each of these documents. Those include detailed explanations of the purpose of each document, strategies for getting started, questions that can help you sort of brainstorm content that you may want to include. But we also have at the bottom of each page these additional resources, which again is going to help you continue to build out your knowledge as you're learning about these new genres. So these are sources we've sort of vetted for you. Obviously, you could just Google, how to write an academic cover letter. You might find some good sources. You're probably also going to find some AI written articles that are kind of nonsense. So these are sources that we feel are particularly helpful, articles from Inside Higher Ed and the Chronicle of Higher Education that are written by faculty members who have served on search committees and who can speak very specifically about, what they're looking for in applicants. We have videos from past faculty job search prep camps. We have tools and resources from some of our partner organizations and vendors, including the PhD career training platform, which I'll mention again in a moment. So these are really good resources to be exploring as you continue to build out your knowledge of these genres. We also have sample CVs and cover letters. Now, again, these are not intended as templates to just copy. One, because that's plagiarism, but even that aside, because you're going to have a harder time setting yourself apart from other candidates if you're just copying someone else's materials. The point of these samples is actually to give you a sense of the range of different approaches and strategies that you can use with these genres. So even something like the CV, which might seem very straightforward, there's different ways that you can structure it and format it to sort of convey different messages to different search committees. And so these samples are meant to give you a sense of that range, and you can start thinking about which approach might make the most sense for you based on the kinds of schools that you're applying to. The other way that career services can help is through one-on-one advising appointments. So there are 4 members in our team who see PhDs and postdocs. We'd be happy to meet with any of you to give feedback on your job materials, though we can also help with other aspects of the job search, help you prepare for interviews. We do mock interviews. We can help you negotiate an offer, if and when you receive a job offer. So we can really support you throughout the kind of full length of the job cycle. So if you use the QR code here, you can go to Handshake, which is the same platform you use to register for the prep camp, and make an appointment. I will say those appointments tend to fill up fast this time of year because there are a lot of people going on the faculty job market. So if you have a deadline coming up, you really want some feedback soon, I encourage you to make an appointment sooner rather than later. The week of August 19th, we are setting aside some appointments exclusively for PhDs and postdocs to try to make sure there's availability in conjunction with the faculty job market. So hopefully you can find some availability this month. Okay, so where else can you learn about these genres? So faculty mentors are going to be a tremendous resource because while there are sort of certain conventions of these genres that are going to be consistent regardless of the field that you're in, there's also going to be minor variations, right? So a research statement for a STEM student is going to look a little bit different than a research statement for a humanities student. So you want to make sure that you're consulting with faculty in your field to make sure that you're meeting the expectations of faculty members in that domain. So, an easy starting point is your PI or your dissertation committee members or, other faculty members in your department. But you're not just limited to Penn faculty. And in fact, if you are applying for jobs at an institution that is quite different from Penn, so for example, if you're applying for a job at a small liberal arts school, I think it's a good idea to actually try to talk to faculty that teach at those kinds of institutions to make sure that you really understand what the kind of priorities and expectations are at those schools and that you're kind of tailoring your materials appropriately, because some schools are going to function very differently than Penn. Now, if you don't know faculty members that teach at those kinds of institutions, that's okay. That's where you can really leverage the Penn Alumni Network. So a lot of departments keep a list of job outcomes for their PhD students. So you can see where alumni from your department are teaching now and reach out to them. You can use LinkedIn to see where other Penn PhDs and postdocs are teaching now. I guarantee you we have PhDs and postdocs teaching at every imaginable kind of institution. So you can definitely reach out. I'm sure they would be happy to talk to you about their experience. And that can just ensure that you're sort of tailoring your materials appropriately. I think non-Penn faculty are a really underutilized resource as people are going on the job market. So make sure you're sort of casting a wide net as you're thinking about who you might want to talk to about your job materials. And then finally, I mentioned it briefly already, but this PhD career training platform is a really valuable resource. So this is an e-learning platform that we subscribe to on your behalf. Anyone with a Penn key can access it for free. And this is going to have information really on every step of the faculty job application. So your written materials, interviewing, negotiating, all of that. I want to show you just a few features of the platform that I think are particularly useful and maybe distinct from what we offer at Career Services. So if you go to this website and click on the faculty careers section, you're going to see they have it divided into kind of 4 stages. I want to highlight just today the evaluate stage and the apply stage. So the evaluate stage, they have some really useful tools if you are maybe still on the fence about whether you want to apply for faculty jobs. And that may be why you're here at the prep camp today, that you're still kind of deciding, is this the right fit? Maybe I want to look at something else. So they have some assessment tools to figure out, what career is right for you if you're still making that decision. But even if you're 100% sure that you do want to apply for faculty jobs, they also have these readiness for the academic job market tool that can help you decide when you might want to go in the job market. So some of you might be still deciding, do I want to go in the market this year? Do I want to wait till next year? Some people do a kind of soft launch one year and then do a full application cycle the next year. So these tools can kind of help you with those to evaluate, what the right moment is for you. And then if you're at the stage where you're going to be applying for jobs, then again, they have resources around all of those written materials that we've been talking about. They have a sort of detailed video-based curriculum, right, for each of these genres. So that's one thing to note. If you're someone who learns better from listening or watching as opposed to reading, the PhD career training platform is useful for that. They try to make these videos very short and easily digestible, keeping in mind that PhDs and postdocs are incredibly busy people. I know you have a lot on your plate. You may not have hours and hours to spend on faculty job materials preparation every day. So these are short videos that try to just hit the highlights, again, thinking about, what the purpose of each of these genres is, but then really taking you through in a granular way, step by step, how to tackle each document. So here for the CV, you can see they have sections on how to tackle the teaching experience section, how to tackle the awards and honors section. So if you have specific questions about certain elements of these documents, it's really going to take you through step by step, which I think is a great resource. And they have these videos for all of the materials that you're going to be asked to produce for the faculty job market. I want to highlight in particular the teaching portfolio, because we're not having a separate session on teaching portfolios for our prep camp this summer. We have done it in the past. There are some videos on our Career Services YouTube channel around that. So if you think you might be asked to submit a teaching portfolio and aren't sure what you might need to include in that, I would encourage you to look at their lessons on teaching portfolios. And then I also want to highlight this workbook that they have. I think this is especially useful for those of you who may be looking for a little more structure in approaching the faculty job search, or maybe thinking, I just need like a step-by-step list, a kind of checklist that I can follow so that I can get all of these materials done. And that's really what this workbook is going to offer. So they have things like sample timelines. So this is one that they put out for the CV. So, you might spend 30 minutes on Monday gathering a list of all your publications, an hour on Tuesday and Thursday drafting the research experience and teaching experience section on your CV. So if you really need someone to help you be accountable and sort of tackle this step by step a little bit every day, it has really useful timelines to help you do that. It also has these brainstorming exercises, which are really useful, particularly for the genres that might be newer to you, like teaching statement and diversity statement. These sort of reflection prompts to get you thinking about what kind of content you might want to include, thinking of stories that you might be able to incorporate into your materials. And then they have these checklists that accompany each of the documents you're going to be asked to produce. And I think these are especially useful for just making sure that you're actually incorporating everything that you're learning about these genres, because it's easy to, watch these videos and attend these workshops, and then you sit down to write and you realize that you haven't actually been following all of the guidance you've been hearing. So the checklist can just be a kind of, last line of defense for that. So this one for the cover letter, they have things like, I've avoided cliches, over exaggeration, and jargon in my cover letter, right? Those are common issues we see in early drafts of faculty job materials. So making sure that you're not overwriting, you're not being too grandiose, which tends to not be as persuasive for search committees. I have not simply repeated what is on my CV. I've written as a colleague, not a student. These are all things you want to be checking for before you submit your materials. So I think this is useful as a kind of final check before you start submitting. The last thing I want to highlight with the PhD career training platform is they have their own academic job market bootcamp coming up later in August. So August 19th through 23rd, you can see that they're focusing exclusively on written job materials. You may be wondering if this is useful for you, since we're doing the same thing here for our prep camp. So as I said, Monday, we're sort of covering most of these genres. But as I mentioned already, those sessions on Monday are not going to be enough to tell you everything there is to know about these documents. So I think it's a good idea to, keep learning, keep seeking out additional resources, keep developing your understanding of these genres. Again, particularly with teaching portfolios, which we're not covering this year, and things like teaching statements and diversity statements that tend to be a little newer and sometimes more confounding for students. So I think this is a great resource as a kind of follow-up to our prep camp to make sure that you really have a good grip on these genres before you start producing your own versions. Okay, so we have know yourself, know your genres. The next step is to know your audiences. And that is audiences plural, that is intentional because there is more than one audience for all of these job materials. You're not just writing to faculty members in general, you are writing, every search committee and department and institution is going to be a little bit different. So you really need to be researching the institutions and departments you plan to apply to so that you can effectively tailor your materials every time. So as you're doing some of that research and thinking how you might tailor, these are just some of the questions that you might consider, or some approaches that you might take. So I like to start by seeing if the school or department has a mission statement, right? That can tell you a lot about what their priorities are so that you can then demonstrate an alignment between your priorities and the priorities of that institution. So, one school might say that they're really committed to that idea of, a broad liberal arts education, and they're really committed to producing, critical thinkers and productive global citizens, something like that. And another school might be focusing more on the pragmatic side of education and saying, they're committed to helping their students find enriching careers and, navigate the job market. So your own job materials might look different depending on whether you're applying to a school that's focusing on the more kind of philosophical side of undergraduate education versus the more pragmatic side, right? You want to demonstrate that you understand their mission and are prepared to help them advance that mission. You want to think about who you might be teaching at that school. So at the most basic level, that means figuring out if you're going to be teaching undergraduates, graduate students, or both. But also a lot of schools publish demographic information on their students. So, you might be looking and seeing a school that teaches a high percentage of first-generation college students, or another school teaches a high percentage of international students. That's information that you may want to include in your teaching statement or cover letter, especially if you have experience working with those populations or a desire to work with those populations in the future, right? Showing an awareness of the specific kinds of students you're likely to be interacting with, again, can be really persuasive to search committees as they're trying to make difficult choices among many well-qualified candidates. I also like to look at how the department is marketing itself on its own website, so marketing itself to students or just community members. So this image here is from the Penn English department website. I just grabbed this randomly. So if I were applying to be a faculty member in Penn English, here's some of the things I might be paying attention to. So they have this statement about intellectual life at the top of the page, right? So I would probably try to incorporate something from this statement in my job materials. I might talk about how I could contribute to their graduate working groups or contribute to their departmental lecture series. I'd be paying attention to the events that they're advertising and thinking about how I might be able to support their existing programming or propose new programming that's going to be complementary to what they already offer. I'd be paying attention to the news on their website and figuring out what I can learn about their priorities based on kind of, what they're bragging about in terms of faculty and student accomplishments. So all of that information can tell you a lot about what they might be looking for in faculty candidates. And it's going to help you, better tailor your materials, again, just showing an alignment of skills, interests, and values for each institution. Now I'm sure you're all wondering, because I get this question all the time, do I really have to tailor every application? That sounds exhausting. That sounds like so much work. I don't have time to do that. And unfortunately, the answer is yes. You really have to tailor every application if you're serious about the job market. Again, it is a competitive market. There are a lot of well-qualified candidates, and ultimately, the applications that are best tailored are usually the ones that end up receiving offers because again, the search committees don't just want someone who can be a professor, who is qualified to be a professor, but someone who's going to be excited to do that work at their particular institution and who's really going to help them advance their particular goals and initiatives. So the tailoring is important. That being said, again, I understand that you're very busy people. You may not have weeks and weeks to dedicate to tailoring every single application. And that's okay. I don't want you to feel like there's no point in submitting an application if you haven't been able to tailor it quite as much as you would like to. I would say tailor it as much as you're able to, right? Figure out, how much time you have amidst your other obligations, figure out which applications you want to prioritize. Some tailoring is better than none, right? Because some candidates won't bother to do any tailoring. So a little bit is better than none, but do as much as you're able to, because we do find that this is often the kind of distinguishing factor. This is what's going to make a difference. More so than just, the number of publications that you have. Okay, so knowing, as I just said, that you are busy people with many competing demands in your time, really the best way to prepare for the academic job market is to know your timelines, be looking ahead to when these applications are going to be due, and then try to break the work down into smaller, more manageable chunks. Right, so you should plan to write in stages rather than all at once. There's no way to produce all of these documents, last minute. You can't expect to kind of pull an all-nighter the night before an application is due and produce high-quality materials. That's also going to stress you out a lot more if you're trying to do it that way. So try to write a little bit every day, write in stages, plan to write a lot of drafts. I'm sure you guys have experience with this with other genres of writing that you've done. So if you think about, the first time you sat down to write a journal article or a chapter of your dissertation, obviously you didn't get it right on the first try, right? You had to do a lot of drafting. So you should expect to follow that same process with your faculty job materials. It's going to take a few tries to sort of get it where you want it to be. You want to be getting feedback from as many people as possible throughout that drafting process. So again, that can be us at Career Services, it can be your faculty mentors. And because there's going to be so many different stages and drafts, it is important to make a plan for when you want to have the various pieces of your application done, right? So if an application is due October 1st, for example, I would work my way backwards from there. Think about, okay, when do I want to have my CV done? When do I want to have my cover letter done? How many drafts do I think it's going to take to tailor each of those? I would give myself a deadline of when I'm going to send my materials to my advisor for feedback, because they probably will not appreciate it if you send them something super last minute, right? They're very busy as well. So making sure that you're building in enough time for all these stages, building in time for your other commitments that you may have, so that you can really produce the highest quality documents. As you go along, you also want to make sure that you're staying organized because, again, there's a lot of moving pieces. This is a tool that I find helpful. It's just the simple but mighty Excel spreadsheet. You guys may have other kinds of organizational and productivity tools that you use, but you do want to be tracking, all the positions you plan to apply for, deadlines, but also tracking exactly what they're asking for when. Because the slightly annoying thing about faculty job applications is that every single school is going to have slightly different submission instructions. And it is annoying, as I said, but that is just the reality that you need to be prepared for. And you need to make sure that you're following those instructions as carefully as possible, because a mistake there could be enough for them to decide that they're not going to evaluate your application, right? They're receiving a mountain of applications. They're looking for ways to weed people out. So you want to make sure you don't give them that excuse. So some schools are only going to ask for the CV and cover letter to begin with, and then they will invite select applicants to submit additional documentation later on. Some schools will ask for all of the documents at once. You may find variations in length requirements. So you can see there's one school here that's asking for a one-page research statement. That's a little bit odd. Typically, research statements are more like 2 to 3 pages. This school wants a one-page one. So that's the kind of thing you want to be tracking ahead of time so that you're not caught off guard, so you don't submit the wrong thing, or so you don't realize at the last minute that you need to kind of redraft your research statement. So I think having everything in a spreadsheet or using some other organizational tool is going to be really important to make sure that you're meeting those deadlines, but also following all of those application instructions really carefully. And I do want to just say one word of warning. Do not send them anything that they do not ask for, right? So if they say they only want a cover letter and CV, only send them a cover letter and CV. Don't send them the other materials, even if you have them ready. That will annoy them, I promise. If they want additional details or additional documents, they'll ask for those later. So it is important to make sure that you're reading those instructions carefully. Okay, so you're going to know yourself, know your genres, know your audiences, know your timelines. The final step is to know your resources and your limits, right? So I've mentioned several times already that this is a long and complicated and arduous and exhausting process. And I don't say any of that to be negative. I hope that that wasn't discouraging or demoralizing for you. It is a manageable process. Every year we have PhDs and postdocs from Penn who secure tenure track offers. So it absolutely is possible. I want you to stay optimistic. I do think it's important, though, to go in with sort of open eyes about what this process entails, to be able to anticipate some of the challenges or stressors that you might face along the way so that you can plan for them now and not be caught off guard and get overwhelmed later on. So now is the time, before you're in the thick of it, to start identifying support systems that can help you throughout this process. And those could be formal or informal support systems. So by formal, I mean something like, maybe wellness at Penn, So there are counselors there that you can talk to if you're feeling really overwhelmed or stressed. They have people who can help with sleep if you're having trouble sleeping, which sometimes happens when you're stressed. They have, meditation sessions, all kinds of things that can help with your physical and mental health. Informal networks, that might just be friends, family. Some people like to kind of warn their friends and family ahead of time about what's going to happen over the course of the fall semester, particularly if those people aren't in academia. Sometimes it's sort of confusing and they're like, why are you so stressed? Why don't you have a job yet? So sort of explaining the process to them and preparing them can be helpful. And then they can also be thinking about the best way to support you throughout that process. So some people do not want to be asked, how is the job search going, right? So if that's the case, maybe you can warn your loved ones ahead of time. Please don't ask. I'll tell you when I have news. Think about what kind of support plan might be helpful. As PhDs and postdocs, you guys have all faced stress before. So hopefully you've developed your own kind of strategies and coping mechanisms already that you can fall back on. For some people, that might mean just taking breaks to go outside, be in the sunshine. It might mean taking a weekend off from applications just to binge watch television and saying, I'm not going to think about the job market this weekend. I'm just going to get caught up on Bridgerton, whatever you need to feel supported through this process. But again, thinking about that now and sort of writing down your support plan now is going to make it easier later on when you're starting to feel overwhelmed. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't feel like you need to go it alone. I do think it's important to have community throughout this process. If for whatever reason you feel like you don't have a strong community in your department or in Philly at the moment, I do want to do a quick plug for the Faculty Job Search Cohort program that we offer at Career Services. So this is a program for PhDs and postdocs who are currently on the academic job market to basically provide ongoing support throughout the fall semester as you're going through the job search process. So it'll meet every other week in person throughout September and October, partly to provide logistical support, so helping with the ongoing work of revising your written materials. But even more importantly, it's about providing kind of emotional and psychological support and just a sense of community, right? So being around people who are going through this same process, having people to talk to, people who can celebrate your victories or commiserate with you when you get bad news, people who can, share information and sort of help you through this process. So if that's something that sounds interesting to you, we are holding an info session about the Faculty Job Search Cohort program next Wednesday at 11 a.m. So I encourage you to join us for that. There is an application form for that. It's a very simple application, I promise. I know you guys are already overwhelmed with applications and don't need another one. Diane's going to drop the link to that in the chat. So if you want to apply to that program, it is just for people actively on the job market right now, but I think it will provide a really great sense of community throughout this process. Okay, so that's what I have for you today. Know yourself, know your genres, know your audiences, know your timelines, know your resources and your limits. This is not everything that you can be doing to prepare for the academic job market, but this is going to provide you with a really good foundation for a more successful job search and hopefully a less stressful job search as you sort of plan things out carefully so you're not being overwhelmed all at once later in the fall.